Good morning. Welcome to the West Valley Center for Spiritual Living. I'm Rev Karen Rice, and I'm so happy that you are able to join us or that you are able to watch the recording of this Sunday morning message. I have something really important to say, a message today that has a bit of a sense of urgency in it almost for me. And I know that the best way to start any gathering is to just bless the time. So let's just take a moment to turn within and just feel that stillness for a moment and recognize that it is that very place of quiet where we recognize that God is. That there is a power and a presence that is indeed greater than we are. It is right here, it is right now. It is that wisdom of the universe that comes together at this point in place in time in order for us to be able to create a connection, a holy communion with each other. And so I know that each person that is listening to the sound of my voice is resonating and aligning with that vibration that is absolutely divine, so that together we might encounter something that we simply could not do alone. I am grateful for this. I bless this technology. I bless our spiritual community, and a special word of blessing for all the things going on in the world. For I know that right where we are, God is, no matter what. I say thank you, life. I let it be, and so it is. Amen. And so here we are, another Sunday morning in something that's beginning to feel a little routine. I look forward to a time soon when we will gather in this sanctuary again. We have prepared it. Last week there was this massive sanitation of all the chairs. We had the chairs professionally cleaned, and the painting is wrapping up in Papke Hall. Kathy Rose Crawford has just worked her little heart out, and all her little volunteers have been so wonderful supporting it. And then here we are again today, another day closer to when we can resume joining as a spiritual community in person. But rest assured, we will continue broadcasting in this way or in a way similar to this, so that we can stay connected in a larger way than we ever have before. I'm talking about something that has me a little revved up, as I already mentioned. The title of my message is Be Wildered, and it's 2 words. I'm not talking just about bewilderment, although we are a little bewildered lately, but I want to talk about it from a different perspective, from that idea of being wildered in a way that maybe has a little sensibility to it. And one of the ideas that spurred the talk is a quote that I keep taped on my monitor of my PC at home. And it's a quote from Daniel Boone, or at least they say that Daniel Boone said these words. He said, "I've never been lost, but I have been bewildered for 3 days." And so I like that, because there's some sense of freedom in that. There's something, I mean, we know Daniel Boone was an adventurer, to say the least, but there's something rather sweet in that idea of not being afraid of being lost and seeing that as a time of bewilderment that's just a part of the adventure. Now, in order to support that idea, I was guided to some new work that's being released by a wonderful author that you probably have heard of, Martha Beck. And Martha Beck is a columnist and an author. She's probably most famous for her book that's Finding Your North Star or something like that. But she has something brand new. She's created a trilogy, a series of books that she's releasing now, and they're actually called The Bewilderment Chronicles. Now, I didn't know any of this when I chose this talk title, let alone did I have any inkling that we would be feeling bewildered by the situation in the world right now. I personally will admit I have felt rather bewildered for about a few weeks. The middle of March, I would say the bewilderment began, and now I'm looking for a way for us to talk about this from a different angle. And so, if I look at Boone and Beck, I couldn't wait to say that. That really tickled me. You know, Daniel Boone, Martha Beck, Boone and Beck. If you put Boone and Beck together, what you get is some great wisdom that maybe it's not important to know exactly where you're at. That not knowing where you are can also be a good thing. And so I think there's a little bit of wisdom here that tells me if we want to find our way, then maybe there's something sweet about admitting we don't quite know where we're at, that we are a little bewildered. And in that space, then we can just be. We can just be what we are in an authentic way in any given moment. Because the truth is, and you all know this as well as I do, especially because we do so much map questing with our devices now when we're traveling. Even a good map and good directions can get you a little lost sometimes. And so that's where the adventure begins. I want us to look at life as a big adventure. Now, I'm so tempted to say this is totally a coincidence, and yet, you know, we all have sort of a spiritual understanding of a coincidence as just God being present when we weren't looking. But I was bewildered this week in the actual wilderness. I had been looking for an opportunity to take some time away, and my soul was craving a connection with nature. And I didn't really feel like I had a lot of time. I wanted to stay fairly close to home. So Hugh and I and our sweet little dog took 3 days this past week, and we stayed in the wilderness up in the mountains in a place completely unfamiliar to us. And we had an experience in the wild. So now, granted, we weren't camping. We were, you know, in a place. We had a house. But man, it was a rural, forested, you know, we were only a couple hours from home, just a little bit above Payson. And there were things there that I have never experienced in my life. I'll post pictures later, or you can follow my husband's Facebook stuff. I, of course, do not recommend that. But if you should happen to be a follower of his, just remember that the wife does not necessarily agree with all of those opinions. But at any rate, we were plopped in the middle of this forest. I don't know that I've ever stayed in a forest with so many trees and such prolific wildlife. And there were deer and rabbits and squirrels and birds that I've never heard singing bird songs that sounded almost Disney-esque to me, you know, a little embellished almost because they were so gorgeous. But they also had elk. I had never seen elk. You know, I had never seen elk. They're big. And they walked right down the driveway of the house we stayed in, and then they lingered on the front lawn, and there is a small herd of them, and they were really large, and it was really surprising, and they were not alarmed by our dog. They were not intimidated by our presence. They were people-friendly, though, you know, I don't want to get too close to them. But that kind of stuff is a little scary for me. It's fun. You know, it's absolutely a major nature fix, but man, that is foreign to my experience of my encounters in nature. That was just a wild experience. And so what I noticed was I would get up first in the mornings. I like to rise early, and I would get up before the sun, and the birds would already be just like so vocal and gorgeous in their song. And then I would take the dog in the back, but it was dark, and it was very quiet. And still, except that, every now and then, I could hear the leaves rustling as critters moved through the leaves very nearby where I was trying to walk my dog. And I was uncomfortable. I will admit to you, I was uncomfortable. And then, every now and then, I would hear a little twig break, like something heavy had stepped on it. So I knew there were deer. I had seen the elk. What nobody warned me about was that there was a Sasquatch living in the woods. And I don't know about you, but that, I know nobody's ever really seen them, but I knew he was there. I could tell he was there. There were strange sounds, and it was big, and it was a difficult time for me to try and relax, and all I really went away for was just some time to rest and relax, and well, that didn't happen. So when the sun came out on that first morning after all of that adventure in my own wilderness experience, I realized that there was something really disconcerting happening inside my being. Like somewhere between the chest and the solar plexus, there was this tightness, and I was uncomfortable, and I'm writing. I love to journal in the morning, and I'm writing my thoughts about it, and I'm writing about Sasquatch and the giant elk, and it kind of made me laugh because I thought, I'm getting the talk. I'm starting to write the talk while I'm right there journaling, and I thought, well, you're going to be on a high horse this week, girl. And then I thought, well, that elk kind of looked like a high horse to me. But anyhow, I was preparing for that, and I suddenly realized I had some really important information that I was beginning to understand about myself that I wanted to speak to you about on this Sunday. And so in that moment of major inspiration, I sent out a Facebook text, a picture of the forest, and a text that said, this Sunday, 10 a.m. live from the West Valley Center for Spiritual Living, the most important message ever delivered from the West Valley. And then I wrote the most important message, and I knew it was the most important message I ever had to deliver. And then I got home and I started typing it up to get ready for now, and I realized, well, I'm really not sure if I didn't oversell it. But here's what I want to say. And what I'm hoping is that if I say this and I speak to you from my heart, knowing that there's a thread of something for everybody in what I'm about to say, maybe I don't ever have to say it again. And that would make me really happy. As I examined my inner feeling, I kept writing, I'm so uncomfortable. Why am I so uncomfortable? And suddenly I realized, it's 'cause you're afraid. You're afraid. You're not comfortable with elk in the driveway. There's nothing wrong with that. And I know that most of you, it's probably too much information. You probably don't need to know this much about me. But what was so beautiful was that I was willing to face it and not try and call it something else or blame it on something else. I was uncomfortable in the wilderness. And I learned something new about myself, that I know where I love nature and where I get along with nature the best. And I know where it pushes me a little bit, my growing edge. And so I was looking at that idea of fear. And I don't know if it's because of what was going on in the world, and I was disconnected from the news and all of this long-term odd way of doing a Sunday morning, but something hit me that I became frustrated with the way we have become so good at hiding our anger and at hiding our fear. And for the first time ever, I thought, on this spiritual path, we have made fear an opposition to love. And we have therefore, just in the same way we demonize the ego, we have demonized the idea of fear so much so that we cannot talk about it anymore. That we have to wait until we have a terrible dream and let that fear out in such a way. Or worse, what I witness happening is that we are taking that fear and we are acting in that passive-aggressive way, and we are getting angry and blaming and shaming people for not making the same choices in our lives that we are making, and we are pulling ourselves all the way down to the beginning in that bottom kingdom one, we call it, that first stage of consciousness that begins in victimhood, because we can't look at fear. And I thought, as I'm writing all this out and I'm feeling like I'm just on fire with this realization that it's how horrible that I have shamed myself for being afraid, when it's just fear? How horrible that we have finally, after decades of fighting for our friends to get out of the closet, we have gone into the closet with our fear, and we dress it up with different names, and we don't admit it, and we deny it. And I began to think that in all these weeks of moving through this virus and this way that we are contained in our homes, in all these weeks when I check in with people, people will say to me, I am not afraid, and almost with some anger in it, I am not afraid of the virus. I am not afraid. And then the sentence goes into condemning other people for not living in the way that we have chosen to live. So yeah, I'm going to try and make this the last week I talk about it, because I'm trying to make peace with the reality that that is what's going on in the world. And I'm not happy because I don't feel like I don't feel like what I say is being heard. I don't feel like people are realizing the impact of the way we are shaming each other instead of loving each other. Okay, so I'm going to get off my high horse. I'm going to try and get off my high horse right now. And I guess all I really want to say is the founder of this teaching always reminded us that we have to acknowledge the discordance. And the discordance in me was fear. And it took me a long time to name it because I kept saying, I'm uncomfortable. You know, I don't feel safe right now. I'm all stirred up. And then in one fell swoop, it was like, oh, it's fear. And so my message is, maybe having fear doesn't mean you're broken. Maybe the fear is a God-given gift to help us be discerning. And maybe we should not look at the power of the word, but we need to look deeper than that at what the word means to us. You know, I'm tired of not speaking to problems and trying to clean it up and just call it a challenge or an opportunity. I don't care what we call it. What we're living in is a time of tremendous change. We are living in a wilderness experience, and in the experience of the wilderness, we find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, and that never feels comfortable. And I think it's really okay for us to acknowledge that it's a little scary. Now, knowing that, I now have a tool to get myself grounded in spiritual truth again. Being willing to look at the discordance within me, feeling it in my physical being, naming it, gives me the characteristic of God, the divine truth that I would rather be experiencing in the moment. So listen to this quote that I found for us. This is so good. It's from Dr. Ernest Holmes, Out of the Science of Mind textbook, and he says this powerful statement: to hold one's thoughts steadfastly to the constructive, to that which endures, to truth. It may not be easy in this rapidly changing world, and the world is changing rapidly, but make the attempt, because if you make the attempt, much is guaranteed. Let me read that to you one more time. To hold your thoughts steadfastly to the constructive, to that which endures, to the truth. It may not be easy in a rapidly changing world, but make the attempt, because when you make the attempt, much is guaranteed. Oh, the world is rapidly changing, isn't it? What worked in 2019 doesn't work in 2020 in lots of ways. The world is changing. What used to make me feel secure doesn't make me feel secure anymore. There is a lot of unknown things. We're living in this wilderness experience, and we don't have all the answers, and we've been very clever at making them up, and I love his emphasis on putting our focus in a steadfast way on that which is constructive. That which is constructive, think about it, it builds us up. It lifts us up. So we have a strong foundation here in this teaching. We have a strong foundation in this community. We know that there is no place where God is not, and we understand how to apply principle in our own lives. And I want to say to you that because I know that so firmly, I'm so committed to it, that I know we are also okay as we move through our own wilderness experience. So stand in that enduring truth and appreciate that even your tiniest attempt to do so is progress. It's helping us along the way. So yeah, we're having a wilderness experience. We are somewhere between Egypt and the promised land that we can't quite see yet. We're moving. We're in this place that I want to say is this in-between place, and that's what the wilderness is. It's that in-between place. You've left Egypt, not quite to the promised land. We're in that middle place, and remember that there's a period of time in which the biblical scriptures often speak of that 40 days or that period, or 40 years, that period of time where you're getting ready. I don't think anybody expressed it quite as well as an author from the 90s. I remember crisply in my mind, William Bridges, not very well known, but did the best work in transitions and personal transformation. And he would always remind us that when something ends, you've experienced some sort of a loss, that there is a beginning. You can be guaranteed there's a new beginning. But in the middle, in that in-between place, is what we call the neutral zone. And he gave great emphasis in his writings about the value of being in that neutral zone. See, that's where all the healing takes place. That's where the transformation takes place, so that we are constructively uplifted and ready to move into that new way of being, whatever that is. So the entire world, there's a worldview that is in transition right now. I would say to you that the way I think of it is it's as though the consciousness of all of humanity is in flux. It's morphing, it's shifting, and it hasn't come into a new concrete shape that we can see or understand yet. And I wonder if maybe all of that is okay. Can we take a step sort of backwards and rest in that sacred space of not knowing? Give ourselves permission to feel any fear that may be around that, so we can acknowledge it, so that we can treat it, we can pray ourselves to a higher perspective, and maybe then we wouldn't have to act out and blame other people when we're just scared. See, that's the talk I'd rather hear and have with you. It's not how you're not afraid. I'd rather have us admit that there is some fear around this. And that we're not real comfortable living in this uncertainty with Sasquatch hiding out in the wilderness behind the bushes. See, we can pray about that then. Listen to this quote by Aldous Huxley, another great thinker. He says, "There are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception." I believe what I'm asking this morning is for us to acknowledge we're in between, and the doors of perception are all around us. You get to go through any door you want. But I think it's time for us to get out our broom, It's time to sweep off the threshold. It's time to clear our vision. And it's time for us to rise, to take that constructive way of building ourselves up spiritually, knowing that the foundation we stand on is solid and that we can certainly move ahead no matter what. No matter what. We're equipped to do this. So you could look at this whole worldwide thing and say, historically, we're between stories. We're in that neutral zone. We're in the wilderness. And for me, in some ways it feels, I know a lot of you will relate to this, it feels like, you've been in this relationship for a long time and suddenly the relationship doesn't feel like it's working anymore. And you don't know when it started to go wrong, but You're starting to see flaws in your old story you used to tell yourself, and you're starting to feel constricted or confined somehow. And so things end. And then there's something else that comes. So I'm not just talking about people, I'm talking about jobs and projects and all of life, because we have relationships with everything in our lives. But I don't know. I just keep thinking I just wouldn't be, personally, I can tell you I would not be one of the first guys to volunteer to be on that ship that's going to go figure out if the earth is flat or not. I'm going to stay home. And I'm going to let them do their exploring. And I'm going to wait for them to come back and tell their stories. And that's sort of where we're at. We're at the edge of everything we knew. And now we're waiting for those really brave souls, the explorers, the discoverers, the Daniel Boones, to go out into the newness of this wilderness that we've never known before, and to come back and give us reports about it before we choose to sort of step into it ourselves. There are no maps. Right? The explorers did not go with maps. They went out to explore. They came back and they put it together and made maps, but when they stepped out, they didn't know. I mean, come on. We are living in a time where even Siri and Alexa are perplexed. They don't have these answers for us. Now, I was reviewing some information as I'm putting the message together for this morning, and I realized that I found this stuff on cartographers, the map makers. And whenever the map makers had drawn as much as they could, giving people routes and ways and describing lands, where there was territory that had not been explored, they would always write, "Here be dragons." Isn't that great? So I don't know that whether they really thought there were dragons there. I think probably not. I think that the explorers and the map makers used that term just to state this is unexplored territory. Here be dragons or Sasquatch. We get to name our demon, right? But it's always in the dark, where you're left alone with your own imagination. So here's something I didn't know about map making. In the ancient days of map making, the person that was the map maker, the cartographer, wasn't necessarily the traveler. But the cartographer would interview those who traveled, so that he would be really interested in talking to the merchants and the missionaries and the ambassadors and the scholars and all those people who did the traveling, and he would get bits of information from here and from there and put it together, and then he would start drawing it out, and then the people would come back and go, "No, it's not like that," and they would argue. They would argue over the details because they were just reporting what they had perceived. They're guessing on distance. They're creating routes that had never existed before. And so there was this great time of trying to fit pieces of knowledge together that had never been fit together before. And I think that we are charting maps right now. We are gathering information. This is new territory. And we're arguing over distances and routes and who has the best information or the most accurate information. And we're trying to make sense of knowledge that doesn't quite fit together. And meanwhile, there's something out there in the bush that keeps crunching on twigs and making funny noises. And we're dealing with our own perceptions of all of it. I just spent 3 days in the wilderness. I'm really happy to be home. And I want to tell you something funny. It wasn't charted on a map anywhere. I took my phone, I typed in the address. There was a house address, and there was even the name of a street, though it wasn't much of a street really. But I typed in the full address, and that doggone directions in that phone, that lady steered us wrong. She took us way up on a hill that didn't have any room for that big old truck to turn around, and that was probably the scariest part of the whole trip. And I was not happy about any of that. that MapQuest did us wrong. But here's the deal. We didn't give up. We stayed the course. We weathered my little where are we breakdown thing that you don't need to know about. We stayed the course and we reached our destination. And we will reach this destination too, whenever this is. I want to leave you with a quote, an interesting quote from a woman I never heard of before. Her name is Naomi Newman, and she is an author and a playwright. And she said these great words. Don't pretend you know where you're going. Because if you know where you're going, that means you've been there before, and you're going to end up exactly where you came from. And that does make me chuckle. And I don't want us to go backwards. I want us to move ahead. I want us to recognize this gorgeous foundation of spiritual truth and possibility that we stand on. I want you to go ahead and laugh at me when I'm fiercely optimistic and enthusiastic about all of this. But I want to tell you something. I learned this week, I might not be Daniel Boone, but I realized that I can feel the fear and I could still see the beauty. And I could still hear the beautiful song of the birds. And I could still have an experience in nature, and maybe it wasn't restful in the way that I thought it would be. But there's something sweet about willing to be wildered. And so I invite you to join me and stand in truth and know who you are and keep loving and forgiving each other. And maybe we want to have a little patience in what's going on in the world. And certainly a lot of prayer. So thanks for listening. I'm off my high horse now. And I want to just ground us, anchor all that's been spoken this morning in the words of prayer. So just take a nice cleansing breath with me. And once again, we turn within, recognizing the indwelling presence of God, that amazing, miraculous activity of life. And I know that it is love. I feel the love of God within me, and I know that love is the greatest force in this universe. And so knowing that there is no place where love is not, that love cannot be contained or limited in any way, that the fullness of God's love is just washing over this earth, and that we, as a great, beautiful part of humanity, all of us map makers in our own way, all of us discovering new things in our own way, that we open ourselves to that higher guidance, to that great cartographer that is the infinite wisdom of all the intelligence of the universe, and that does know the way, that is the creator of all of it and all that is yet to come. And so I feel a stirring of gratitude. I feel peacefulness at the core of my being in this willingness to name what it is that is the disturbance or the discord, and to then be able to turn away from the discord and to look directly into the truth, the divine truth. There is a power and a presence that is greater than we are, and we can use it, and we use it even now with these words of prayer. And so I speak my word of blessing on this planet, on every individual on this planet, on the movement of life, on this edge of growth that we find ourselves in, on this time we are spending in the wilderness, in the neutral zone, in the way that we are healing, and we are thereby revealing a greater sense of wholeness, not only individually, but in this magnificent collective way that we are doing good work on this planet. And so I say yes to God. I say yes to the grace that is pouring and streaming to all of my loved ones and all of the people in this community and everybody that can hear the words of this prayer. I say yes. We stand as open vessels, accepting this good this day. We are healed. We are whole. We are revealing the perfection that God would have us be. And therefore, I confidently know that all is well, and that every manner of being is well. All is well. I give thanks for this. And I simply release these words into the divine law, knowing it responds and it is done. And together we say, and so it is. Amen, amen, amen. I have my offering and I have my companions here doing good work with it. Thank you, Clyde. If you'd like to drive over and drop your offering off, we will be out in the parking lot. I love you. I love you. Have a blessed week and forgive me. Love me. We'll talk to you soon.